Exercise foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens.
Broadcast from later, back from hiatus. We're exchanging weak signals of change and trying to understand their significance. A weak signal of change is just something that we notice, an event, an idea, development, an issue that we don't fully understand yet, but we suspect it might be meaningful in shaping the futures of our lives and society. As foresight strategists from later, we're steadily tracking and tracing and soaking up and trying to make sense of what's changing. And on these broadcasts, we're giving a glimpse of what it looks like when we're trying to understand something that we don't know anything about yet. It's basically structured like show and tell. A few of us each bring in a signal. The rest of us do not know what that is in advance. Collectively, we're trying to make sense of it in public. And if you're listening and you feel lost and you don't know what we're talking about, it's no problem because neither do we. I don't know anything. Everybody is just trying to figure it out as we go. So today on the room call, we have Macy Sue, Erica White, our producer, Jeremy Glenn. I'm Robert Bolton, and back with us for the first damn time, Hima Batavia. Hima is a writer and artist in Toronto. Her futures work is rooted in radical systems imagination, working and playing toward liberated futures. Hi, Hima.
Hey, hi everyone.
Welcome.
Hey, so nice to be here.
Thank you for being here. So we, as you know, for the context of those at home, collaborated on the Desire Path podcast, which explored futures of the city we're in, Toronto, through the lenses of 6 different artists. I recommend people check it out. It's a really vividly produced and poetic and dreamy audio experience. Shouts to Jeremy, our producer, who got to flex on that. But I was curious for you, Hima, to reflect for a minute on what you learned creating Desire Paths in the curatorial role that you played and the producer role that you played.
Yeah, I'm so glad we got to work on that project together. I think it was really formative for me. It also was happening at it was like a beautiful project at a really tricky time in the world. And so it felt really grounding to actually ground in futures with so many imaginative and visionary folks in the city. And some of the things that I learned from that piece of work was how much the built environment can actually inform how we think about futures, and it being the material on which we can imagine futures. There was something really unique about dreaming in that way while physically moving, we were walking and we were looking at the built environment, we were looking at monuments, we were looking at places that were meaningful to each of these artists and using that as the jump off point for imagining what could be. And so in some ways it was its own, that created the container for imagination, which is it actually creates a lot of constraint in some ways, but it creates a lot of context. There was so much context in how people thought about those futures. And I also think each of those pieces, they really feel like an artifact, and I know in speculative futures work, it's this work of creating artifacts to bring people into another time. It felt like those pieces really accomplished that, and that you could listen to them in the next 5 years and there would still be relevance because of what we were talking about, Futures of Toronto. It's that's such a long timeline, right? That thing's going to move so slow. And I think in 5 years, we'll look back and probably see some of those things start to be actualized, or at least the language even actualized in in the mainstream. But yeah, I really feel them as artifacts. And when I reference them, they feel that way. And each of them are actually so unique. I think the one that was really impactful was the Portland's episode, where they went in and actually created a story and introduced new kinds of infrastructure and governance structures and language that was so evocative and really, I think, pushed the thinking of imagination and what that place and just place in general could be. So that, I would say that episode had a huge impact on me. And then, I even think about the episode with Javed, where we talked about that one. About sacred futures and just if you're not looking critically, you can really take them for granted, and like how we think about what is represented in permanent structures in the city, right? And Javed made this point about like when we think about the diversity of Toronto, like ethnically, but also religiously, it's like the way that's often represented in public space is like, here's a festival, right? Here's a temporary festival. You can have space, but it's one, temporary, two, it happens once a year. And that's kind of the extent of it, right? Otherwise, it's like, yes, people have like their religious spaces, but they're sort of like parceled off rather than like the meaning of what it means to have permanent structures that actually like, you know, share the values of different belief systems and allow that to exist in a much more permanent way. And so I think about that a lot, you know, and in like how the values of our city are actually represented in the architecture, how that then like manifests in so many other different ways. So that episode was really impactful. Yeah.
There's so much to them, and they are really dreamy. I don't know. It's quite an experience to take a walk while listening to any one of them and notice what you notice. So I wanted to talk for a minute before we get started about your artistic work as well. I was thinking maybe to do that sort of in confluence with memory work. So memory work is a future study and a platform for further speculative imagination that exists at memory-work.com and as a monument at the Bentway in Toronto. But you, Hima, have done two separate works that sprung from memory works, world building, as well as from the research platform. And yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to maybe talk about even characterizing your practice and then how you sort of used memory work on those two pieces and did so in a way that I know Macy and I like sort of love that the way that you were taking and giving and exchanging with that project in exactly the way we hoped would happen. And if you could, tell a little bit about what it was like.
Well, thank you for doing memory work. It obviously was hugely influential for me. Like I think the work.
Thank you for
really,
responding.
Yeah, I think the work like really, really spoke to me, you know, and it really, it was like a jumping off point for my own imagination and for my own practice and a starting point for like creating a world. So the two pieces, one was Akanzaila that was presented at the Myseum Intersection Festival in 2021, and it was a virtual piece. And then the second piece was Higher Hair, which was presented first as a study at the Geary Art Crawl and then at Summer Works this past summer, which is a festival in Toronto. And what memory work did was like create these characters that could exist in the world, right? These roles and these characters that I resonated with. I was like, I could be both of these characters, or like, you know, I see some of these qualities in myself, or like I see some of these qualities that I want to like exist in the world. And so I think like I found like a deep resonance with these characters at like a personal level. And because like my practice that I've been experimenting with is kind of this intersection of like durational performance and then also building worlds where that durational performance can live in. The starting point was like, okay, if I was going to be this character, you know, with Akanzaila, it's like, what's a day in the life of these characters? And so I took a lot of the pieces from memory work to start to create a world and a person. Akanzaila was a climate refugee who had come from India and was sort of living in Tikaranto in kind of a future place in 2050 about. And that was a place where there was like indigenous leadership and stewardship, and there was rewilding of the land. And there was a lot of like solidarity with rewilding of the land. There was blurred lines between the physical and digital worlds, and also a really strong relationship across species in terms of communication and also relationally. And so it was an 8-hour durational work where I just lived the day of it. And so I just kind of created the artifacts, created the space, had sort of a sense of like how that day would flow. But ultimately it was like, it's not scripted, right? The work of performance art is to just live it and to allow it to unfold with your audience. So I would say like in that piece specifically, you know, the first few hours of it are like, they were very uncomfortable. Like I was just like, how do I get into this? Where do I find my flow? And of course, it kept going, and I kept leaning more deeper into like these structures and these ways of communicating. And I also had like an AI assistant that was like part of the show that I would communicate with, and people sent me voice notes of care that I would listen to. But, you know, at the end of it, like truly, like after 8 hours of living this character, I like could feel the reality of that future in my body. And I don't say that lightly, you know, it took me days to come back, right? Which I guess is very similar to method acting. But it took me days to like reorient back into like this reality. And I think there was just something really, especially with that performance, that unlocked in me, where I was like, what are the ways in which futures live in our bodies? Or what are the ways that we can plant them in our bodies? You know, they start conceptually in our minds. And, you know, your team did the conceptual work around that. And then what I feel like I did the embodied work around it. Where I was like, whoa, like this is not conceptual anymore. Like my body understood these gestures. It said these words. And I think that in embodying it, then you can start to bring it into like practice in a different way in your life, right? In small ways, and sort of just move it from one realm to another realm. And so the same thing sort of kind of happened with Higher Hair, where I was playing the role of the cosmetic healer, which is one of the roles that was presented in memory work. And that was like something that really resonated with me, and that like it intersected with my own experience of hair. And my own kind of life story around hair, which is like a long story, but I was able again to connect my own personal experience to this possible future and this possible vision, and then live it. And so that was like a durational work where people were brought into this like otherworldly spa and invited to explore the ancestral stories in their hair, while listening to like an audio journey that again was like supposed to be like an artifact and a voice from another place, while I played with people's hair. So the first time I did it 52 times. And the second time I did it 25 times, right? So like I've like played with like over 75 people's hair, listening to this track over and over again. And physically, like the movement, again, like the physical movement of moving through people's hair and exploring the stories in them, like just through feeling them and feeling people's energy. And then also listening to the language in the track, I felt fully embodied in the potentiality of a cosmetic healer. And like, and I think want it to exist in the world in a new way, in a way that is like, of course, this is going to happen, right? Rather than could this happen? Should it happen? Will it happen? Why it happens? I'm just like continually thinking about how that work can evolve and grow. And there was something really unique about playing with people's hair and then moving them through an experience that just allowed people to go to really deep places. And like, I would say like 80% of people, not to say this is a metric of success, but it's sort of a metric of success, but I would say like 80% of people sobbed. And I think that recognition, or that signal that I think that you found in memory work of just like, what do we actually hold in our hair? And this idea of hair being like sensory technology, right? Antennae, places of archival. I think cultures have known that for years, but again, there's been such a loss of that, right? And so what does it mean to sort of bring that back in like a new conception?
Yeah, so many layers to the like memory, the remembering the uterine, and all the layers to that. Thanks you for saying that. I love that. And I also just feel in futures work, as in maybe in the arts in general, it's like seeing more sort of contemporary responses to one another's work, and that in this kind of way is, I don't know, I think it's really beautiful. I think it's also like courageous of you as an artist. I think there's a hang up on like authorship and stuff like that sometimes, and there's like no question that what you did is wholly new, wholly yours, wholly different than what memory work was, and you didn't hesitate to like draw from project, which is like, and I think also what it's there for us. And I think what most artists want to happen with their work,
and I think for me, like I'm so drawn to collaborative practice, and to me that was sort of partly living that, and not feeling tied to authorship in any way. And I think that's also just like an embodiment of like the world I want to see as well. What is it, like all these all these ideas of collective futures, and like what does that actually mean, right, on a day-to-day? Like, exactly. I think we're actually just navigating it and trying different things and experimenting with it. So
a project like that definitely feels like, okay, this is much bigger than anything any one of us contributed. It's like, this is something much bigger, much deeper, much longer lasting.
Yeah, it felt really beautiful for me to be able to to be inspired by your work. And yeah, so thank you again.
Thanks.
It was so formative to me. Yeah.
Okay, let's get started in the fun practice of us not knowing what we're talking about here. I can tell Macy wants to get it out of the way. So Macy, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, yeah. I mean, going to the vein of not knowing what I'm talking about, this was just something interesting that I came across. So in China, there's this video, like their version of TikTok on Douyin. There's this 28-year-old influencer that's making these short video guides about essentially how to get through everyday situations. And they've been deemed as a social survival expert. And these are just like very common sense, like situations, like how do I take the bus? How do I take a high speed train? How do I go to the airport and take the plane? How do I go see the doctor alone? How do I make a Starbucks order? How do I order McDonald's? How do I go to the cinema? And I think the target audience is not too young, but like young, like early 20s netizens who are maybe don't have so much life experience and maybe is like coming from more rural communities to the big city. So they maybe feel alone in terms of not knowing how to navigate city life. But kind of what drew me was like, this got me thinking, like, how did I learn these things? It was definitely not like watching videos online. It was probably like following my older sister on the bus or like just doing it and being like completely embarrassed and like failing miserably or actually being in a crisis situation. And I think the impetus of why they started this video is like she saw like someone post like a young person posting a video that's like, oh, all my life, I'm like in my 20s, all my life, I've just been like studying and like sitting behind a computer. And like, I've never even taken a plane or never even taken like a high speed train. And I don't know how to do these things. And I guess like the intention is to like really show support and break things down. But yeah, like this moniker that they've gotten, this like social survival expert, just kind of was interesting to me. Like it kind of drew me into to be like, what would this role like formalized look like? Is this something that we're going to need in the future? And that's not to say I feel like this kind of breaking things down and instilling this life experience, common sense is not new. I mean, I guess like we support kids doing that. We support people that might have challenges doing that. I know there's a lot of work being done in terms of supporting those with autism, for example. But is this something that like we're going to need because we're so, in a way, like, are we scared of like trying new things? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just
it's great. There's
caught my attention.
So many angles to go at it. I mean, even right off the bat of like, is survival just an exaggeration? Like, is calling that survival? I don't know. Is it survival? And it's obviously it's social survival. It's hedged by that, I guess. But is that like too strong of a word to call this? Or what does that tell us about the fear of anxiety, of not knowing, of uncertainty, of embarrassment? Like, is there something about our current condition here that is like so maybe fragile that we consider not knowing how to take the bus or go to a cinema for the first time? Or, and maybe you've done it before and you're still checking this, this TikTok to be like, just to make sure you don't look stupid, or like, has it changed where you buy tickets or whatever? Like,
yeah, it feels like an over extension of like just information for everything, or that like needing to reference like so many sources to actually like trust anything or like even trust yourself. So this like behavior of just referencing information, referencing reviews, referencing YouTube videos. Maybe it's like an extension of that. I do agree though, the word survival seems really interesting, and like what constitutes like, is it like shifting the idea of survival into sort of like these basic everyday activities? I'm teaching a course right now on TED.com, and it's called How to Be an Adult.
Oh, Okay.
And it's based on a book by Julie Lythcott, who like did a TED Talk. And it's just a really like, it's so didactic, right? You're like, it's like, and what's really funny about this course is like 20-year-olds take it, but also 60-year-olds take it. And it's like,
There's a lot of people of all ages who need help learning to be an adult, and I think maybe all of us in some way or another.
Yeah, it's very didactic, and it feels like it should be common sense, but perhaps it's like also demystifying this thing that maybe we've assumed as common sense, but isn't.
What's covered in how to be an adult?
It's essentially like, how do you take responsibility for your life?
Right.
Like, how do you take responsibility for your emotions, take responsibility for your struggles, take responsibility for your challenges, for every aspect of your life? How do you really embody responsibility and trust that like you can figure it out?
So it's a little bit more psychological or something than like mundane how-tos. There's not as much of those. It's not like, and this is how you do your taxes. It's more like
yeah, exactly.
If you have to go do your taxes and like,
it's like, how do you have a hard
of it?
Yeah, how do you have a hard conversation with someone?
Right.
So there's some practical things, but not as practical, I would say, as like how to do your taxes.
But it's very related, and in general, there just being so much fear and these things that it should be, that we all sort of know should be fairly mundane. And my sense is that the how to be an adult, that what you're talking about, has always been something that people needed reminders as they age and everything. That like people always have gotten into like childish, arguments with their best friends, even in their 50s or, later or whatever, the same way that they do when they're younger. And that's just like, even when you know better, you still need those type of reminders.
Yeah. But how does adulthood change if you study it? Like, what is the experience of it change if you start studying it?
Interesting. Yeah.
Because there are certain expectations of what it is to be an adult. And those also, I think those should also be broken apart, because they don't always meet the time, or they maybe make you become an adult too soon. There's the contrast of understanding what an adult is. I was wondering if these are presented as like city lifestyle. So this is how you do things, and this is the lifestyle of someone that lives in a city. Because I love the idea of TikTok as a reference book. I saw someone saying that they use TikTok as like a search engine to just do stuff, to look up stuff. So using TikTok as like a search engine outside of something like Google is really strange. And I could see these how-tos being a part of that.
It's very like practical. It's like, it's a bit like a manual. It's like, first you buy the ticket and you check your train number and you make sure, there's a high-speed train. So there's lots of trains coming. So you better double check that is your train that's coming on the track. Like, very, very, very practical, as opposed to having like a more certain like point of view, I guess. But also like on the flip side of it, they did say like, I'm looking at the series like not just about really big city, but like I'm also interested in like doing these videos for like bringing to my hometown, bringing to like the farmlands, and doing something similar with everyday things in those settings. So yeah, I guess it kind of questions like, what do we consider common sense? Like, and also like where you're based, where you're coming from, like that set of knowledge is like in situ specific, these kinds of things. Like, how do you order something? How do you take the train? How do you take the bus? Might be like, how could someone not know that if they have like lived their whole life within a urban setting? Similarly, I'm sure like, how do you plant a seed, or like how do you grow something is like similarly common knowledge for someone who's grew up in rural areas, right? So that framing of like what's common knowledge was kind of interesting to me.
Yeah, I love that. I think that makes TikTok almost really valuable as this place that you would search for those kind of things, like, or that on the opposite side, that you would become, like Rob was saying, really reliant on it. I'm thinking of the way we kind of use Google Maps. We rely really heavily on Google Maps to kind of guide us. Would you always reference this library to just do any and everything?
No, it's kind of like those WikiHow articles where you're like, okay, I'm reading this, but it's actually not helpful. But maybe for someone who's never done it, like it is. Whereas like, definitely I find life hacks is like, wow, it's like almost revelatory sometimes for me. Like, never knew like this could happen if I did this.
And it's not even like etiquette either, right? Which is another thing where you could see, like if it was letting you know, like after you use your basket at the self-checkout, you should put it in the like particular basket thing, or, you know, some basic etiquette for going through airline security again with the, you know, buckets or whatever, baskets, like that kind of thing.
I think maybe there's some inserted. I think maybe also like that's how like the TikTok, the video format, like someone kind of narrating, they're doing it at the same time, helps with that. And like one thing that was interesting also, like I remember they were saying, and don't forget, like you can ask people questions, like don't be afraid to ask questions. They can help you, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's what is most fascinating to me, is like, why do we so badly need to know what to expect before we do something? Is that something that is specific to our time right now, and that maybe this is a signal of more of that to come?
Like two things come up for me. One is like, it kind of reminds me of the difference between a tourist and a traveler. The tourist is like, they must research everything before they go to a place, including the videos on how to use the bus, right? Those are actually quite common when you're traveling, and for some people who are over planners. But the traveler is like really interested in figuring it out as they go and making the mistakes and finding like the stories and the poetry and all of the kind of failures of life. And so I don't know, are we like raising a generation of tourists versus travelers in some ways? Or like, do the stakes of being a traveler feel too high? And then the other thing that came up for me is kind of, Erica, when you talked about Google Maps, I'm like, I wonder what it would look like to annotate maps with these kinds of videos. That you could access these videos as you were like moving around a place. And who knows, maybe they would be really useful.
As a form for, say, an artifact from a possible future, what would be the mundane social survival video, how-to video from the future? That's something that's so normal in a particular future that you would expect people like to need that help with. I think it's like, yeah, could be an interesting like futures artifact, speculative artifact format.
Totally, yeah.
I think how to turn off your computer would be like do wonders for me, because I never turn off my computer. It's like how to clear tabs, how to turn off your computer is the most mundane thing I need right now.
It's more like, yeah, a reminder to do it.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I felt. It's just like the tone and like the way that these videos are presented is very like, it's very caring and supportive. And like, yeah, it's just like a reminder, you're not alone. Like we all experience new things. So I'll just walk you through it. Like we can do it together type of thing.
I wonder if there's also like a suggestion in there around just the changing demographics of places and like people moving around a lot. And so needing that support and care in a new way. Yeah,
it might just be that partly just this is just where people get information now too. And that, you know, you used to get it from
TikTok
whatever,
search engine.
Sorry?
The TikTok search engine.
For sure. In fact, when you said that, I was like, no, I'm not surprised about people using TikTok as a search engine. Like I'm not surprised by that at all. I think like that's what people do. People use YouTube as a search engine all the time. Why wouldn't they use TikTok? Like people go straight to YouTube for learning how to fix something or whatever.
I think it's interesting to be keeping note of a city like that, to have collectively people taking note of a city in that way, of all the little minute things you would be doing, because in that, maybe they're not talking directly to the things you would hack, but it feels like with that kind of thing, all kind of being collected and talked about, that you would kind of see the things that might be invisible to the everyday as well. That would be my like hope out of something.
Yeah, it's very cool to think about the weird and the very flexible type of guide that could be created. I don't know. Do any of you have like a Google document or email thread that you share to various people about a particular city that you've had a bunch of experiences in, that you would like with your suggestions and stuff?
I've had it shared with me, and it's like so useful, like a Google Doc. And also when I was in Oaxaca last year, a few people shared with me like a Google map, and they had marked all the place. Yeah, just pins.
I mean, I love that when someone shares it with me, especially like it's kind of like what Hima was saying, when it's annotated with like, you know, someone that I value their tastes or value like, and a bit like what Erica was saying in terms of like lifestyle or a certain perspective on place or space.
Curated prepping.
I would be curious though, this person who creates this video, does he feel like he can't survive? Like without knowing these things, like what is it? I don't know if it's a he, sorry. What are their relationship to survival?
I think for them it's more just like, I have a bit like, I've lived in the city so much. I just want to help people who might feel alienated or unfamiliar to feel comfortable.
Oh, okay. So it's just like it's an act of care. It's actually not from their own perspective.
I'm your bigger sister. I will tell you like how to do this as a starting point, I guess, you know.
I'm sure there's tons of young people. Exactly that is that there's might be tons of young people that also it'd be useful for. I think of like if I have a younger cousin coming to visit me in the city, I would want them to know how to do the things, and I could tell them, but maybe they do their research and they find all the little ways and feel comfortable to do that.
Exactly. But that's why I was like, how did I learn like how to do these life things, like washing your clothes, or like, you know, when you're really young and you're just like, these are kind of things that you didn't really know. And how did I learn? I guess it's just like watching your parents or watching an older sibling, or being able to ask a friend, being like, I'm so ignorant in this. Can you like, what do you do? Or, you know, and I guess this is kind of maybe the format.
I do worry about our capacity to fail though.
Yeah. That is kind of like that aspect that I'm like, where is this going to go? Like, at an extreme.
Well, okay, so let's go do a round here of signal or noise. Erica, do you think it's a signal or noise? And if signal, of what?
I think it's a signal. I think it's a signal of prepper culture and a very interesting, intense form of prepper culture. Like I was saying, curated prepper culture.
It's as normcore as like having your shelves lined with canned goods.
Yeah.
That last you for the years.
Yeah,
That's
but you need to you need to know all the things that are happening in the city and how to do them. And I think it comes very naturally to some people to over prepare for very simple tasks. And for other people, they just do throw themselves in it. But the question of what will take hold in terms of like a greater group of people is, I think, also fun. But it also reminded me quickly, my first essay in school, one of my professors asked me to write an essay on how would you survive if you had to like get out of the country or go unnoticed. And it kind of reminds me of that, like, how would you survive if you had to just go to a city that you didn't know? Kind of that, now that information is, really accessible online to do these like very interesting, mundane things.
TikToks for like fugitives and like intelligence professionals and spies and stuff.
Okay, it's a little different, but still.
I like it.
Signal.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I wonder about like something in what you were getting out of just there are expectations of uncertainty so high now, and based on just the past few years of reality, that you just are looking for anything you can do to have some control and predictability out of like whatever you're going to do, and just be prepared and not have to feel not ready. Yeah. Hima, what do you think? Signal or noise?
I think it's a signal. I think on like the hopeful side, it could be a like manifestation of community care. You know, like I've moved around so much in Toronto, and I always dream of someone knocking on my door the day after I move and being like, let me show you the neighborhood, you know, let me show you where the best grocery store is, where you can get your dry cleaning, where the library is. Of course, I can figure that all on myself, but I would
thing imaginable.
Literally don't talk to your neighbors for like 2 years. So I think just the way that you described it, Macy, just like the kind of genuine nature of it, and it coming from a place of care, it could be trying to live that practice of community care. And then I would say my less hopeful is that it is really squeezing our capacity for uncertainty, which I think, Erica, you were getting at, and just a whole new relationship of what it means to trust ourselves and trust the world, and trust that like we can approach it without information and still be okay.
Yeah. It's funny. I kind of am lumping your how to be an adult into my interpretation of this now, but I actually think it is both, even though they're doing different things. But both the how to be an adult and the social survival expert I think it's doing the job of religion, like giving you kind of, this is how to be and in everyday life, and how to go about things, and what to do and what not to do, and how not to, what to look at, who not to look at, and all of these different things that are in terms of just how you approach the world, confront different types of situations that arise. But if you like the Bible or any religious texts, like there's often a lot of really mundane stuff mixed in with the grander, this is how you should live, this is how to behave morally side of things. And so I wonder if this is just sort of what's coming up and replacing some aspects of religion, and not necessarily through the like grand sort of heroic and spiritual stories, but just the mundane parts, just this is how we be in society aspect of like what religion does for us or has done historically. So playing that role, I guess, in a world where people don't read or sit in sacred spaces and listen to sermons and whatnot. People do though, but maybe where many don't. All right, so it's a signal for me as well. Erica, do you want to go next?
Yeah.
What is your weakest signal?
Yeah. Kind of excited about this one because I've had a lot of new parents in my life. So
new parents?
Yeah, new parents, like a lot of new parents. And
okay, new parents. Right.
New
not
parents.
To you.
No, I'm not a new parent, but I know people with babies.
Yeah. No, for some reason I interpreted it as like you have new people acting as your parent. I was like, oh, it's related. It's like more people giving guidance on how to experts everyday things.
Yeah, no. But yeah, so my signal is lab grown milk. There's this one company called BioMilk, which was recently covered by Molly Fisher in the New York Times. They're basically trying to replicate breast milk.
Human breast milk.
Yeah, human breast milk. This is for infants. This is formula for
infants.
infants. So lab grown milk ends up being for breast milk. They're using pharmaceutical technologies to just either engineer yeast to generate animal proteins. Actually, that's usually it. They're engineering yeast to generate animal proteins. And the process is somewhat costly, but also the results, same as lab grown meat, they end up being kind of impressive in terms of what can be produced. And so my signal is just around milk that can be artificially produced. So what biomilk is doing is they're trying to replicate cells that are found in breast and milk to then artificially grow cells that will then secrete milk components. And that's what makes it different from formula. And that's what makes it different from milk. There's milk components in it. And that means just that it has similar nutrients to breast milk.
And it's like molecularly like this indistinguishable for the most part, or?
From what I understand, the cells go through the motion of like secreting milk. But Molly Fisher kind of says that basically it's just supposed to replicate the components of milk. And yeah, it's not going to meet all the needs of breast milk. And it's not supposed to, fully, it's not perfect. So it can't actually be breast milk, but it is an alternative formula.
Has it been tested at all? Like on infants?
From what I understand, there's lots of trials. I don't know if it actually has been tested on babies per se.
It's not on the market yet. It's like,
yeah, from what I understand, I don't think it's on the market. It is seen as a high-end product that a lot of money is going into right now. So you have like the Gates Foundation kind of funding it, and it's a startup. So it costs a lot of money to actually produce an artificial formula like this. But then, yeah, it's also what makes it cost so much money is that you need babies to test it on, and you need the resources to have those kind of facilities and make sure that it is able to be on the market. And I think there are a lot of limits to what would qualify it to be on the market.
Have you floated it to any of your parent friends?
Not yet, no. But I guess part of it is something that would similarly come up, I'm sure, is just, and which came up with the lab grown meat, is would they trust something like lab grown milk?
This may be a stupid question. Is there a market for real human breast milk? Is that, I mean, there must be somewhere, but
I think for sure. Yeah.
Huge. It's huge.
Like huge.
Yeah,
like
it's really huge.
It's
Yeah,
illegal to sell it, but there is like breast milk people still do, but there's breast milk exchanges on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
And also like traditions of wet nurses and everything.
Yeah. That's what I think
Right.
makes it illegal. But there are lots of breast milk banks in the
Mhm.
States as well. So there's unofficial trade networks of people reaching out on Facebook groups to kind of get milk if they need it. And then there's also, I think there's companies that do actually sell on the shelf human breast milk. I think I read that briefly. So I'll have to check that one.
I'm curious also, like, I guess the lab grown milk is still going to be like administered by bottle, right? Like, I think part of the really tough part for mothers who might not be able to produce the amount of milk that the baby needs, or, you know, there might be reasons where breastfeeding is not an option, is like there's stigma around not being able to like really bond with the baby, right? And also just feeling like inadequate in the sense that, oh, my body is not producing what my child needs. So I'm wondering also, like, in line with the lab grown milk, which I guess is like fulfilling kind of the nutrient side of it, like, is there thought into being able to administer that in a way, like to feed your baby in a way that is like more natural too?
What I really liked about this article is it brought up the history of that stigma around breast milk and how it played out in like the history of how formula came to be. And the reality of it is that there are many people who either can't produce it, don't produce it, or some babies are allergic to certain formulas. They can be allergic to breast milk. So there's just multiple cases. There's many different cases of what a baby needs. And yes, this artificial milk doesn't exactly replicate an experience of feeding, but I think it's just very complex in terms of what the role of breast milk, I guess, is in a baby, given what their specific needs are. But that did come up in the article, that there are a lot of studies that are meant to show like the value in the nutrients in breast milk. So even if these companies if they are able to replicate it in a certain way, will it fulfill the kind of bonding or motion of breastfeeding? It's a whole other, I think, thing that comes with using formula and not using formula.
Like, a few things come up for me. One, I wonder if the adoption will be different than formula. Like, will there be more trust? Because I think like some mothers who decide formula for production reasons and or for practical reasons, like they've already sort of got over that hump in some ways. Like they've found trust in some kinds of formula. And so I wonder if there'll be like a difference. Like, why would you trust formula over lab grown milk or vice versa? But one of the things that I noticed in a group of friends that I had that became parents, and some of them had either production challenges and or chose not to breastfeed for as long, is that they were ordering formula from Germany. And so there was like this formula that you could only get in Germany that was like organic and, you know, all the things, right? Like pesticide free and this free and that free. And I just thought that was so interesting. I'm like, there's no brands in North America that like you feel safe enough to give to your child. And these packages would come, they'd all kind of do bulk orders together for this like formula product from Germany. And so, yeah, I wonder if there is some kind of gap in what formula is right now and what people are actually looking for. The one thing that I learned recently is that women spend 1,800 hours a year breastfeeding. If like you full-time breastfeed, it's like equivalent to almost like a full-time job. And so there's like an aspect of it that just doesn't feel practical. Like it's so unpractical for so many women who have certain kinds of careers and responsibilities.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I'm curious about is, I guess, hypothetically, with a process like this, you could try to be like personalizing this to actually create a particular mother's breast milk that would be made from cell sample, memory cell sample or whatever from that particular mom for her child, which is, I don't know if that's like something they have any plan to do, or if that would actually be something like a different type of service we could imagine one day that would, like relieve some of the labor that you were just talking about.
I think we've all probably heard about conceptions of like contemporary parenting, right? Like where it's kind of, yeah, it's over information and it's like trying to figure out what the best solution is for everything, right? So it's like, what's the best cotton for my child? What's the best stroller for my child? And like, again, that like over information and like trying to optimize around everything. I can only give my child organic. I can only give my child formula from Germany, like all of these things. And that comes with like a certain kind of privilege. But she was connecting it to like the connection between mothering and the military industrial complex, which is like this like high level idea of like the world is unsafe. The world is an unsafe place. And so I have to control every single decision that I make and every single thing that my child ingests and wears for them to be safe.
Just turning into the control episode.
Yeah.
For safety.
So I mean, as if lab grown milk becomes, I don't know, who knows? Maybe there'll be studies that show that it's like even safer than breast milk, or that it's even more predictable than breast milk, or even the nutrients are higher than breast milk. Like technically, if you're growing it, then wouldn't you just like optimize for all these nutrients that might sort of feed into this idea that we have to like ensure our children get the best of everything because the world is just an unpredictable and unsafe place.
And then that gets into a place of like, who can afford this product?
Yeah.
I mean, if the benefits are better and it's not breast milk, this company has positioned itself as being like woman-owned, women-led, and for parents.
Mothers and
for mothers and for parents, right? But would this become an option like getting oat milk when you get in your coffee or whatever? If it's,
I mean, it is a delicate.
So there's another company called Are.na, and they're one of the competitor companies.
And it's breast milk for coffee shop bros.
No, not. It's still formula for infants and for children, but it has a leg up because it's genetically engineered to produce proteins that have sugars attached to them, which is supposed to be better for the immune system, or it's supposed to support an infant in their immune system and in any kind of antibodies that a child would get from feeding.
Is this going to make that stigma even worse? Or it's just like, I can't breastfeed my child. I need to like get this product. Like my milk is definitely not enough, even though I can produce it and I have it. And like my child can be breastfed naturally, but it's not enough.
Like, is it going to degrade breast milk, right? Is now that going to be the lesser, because formula is the lesser of the two in some circles, not to say I necessarily agree with that, but let's say in some circles, it's the lesser of the two. Will natural breast milk now become the lesser of the three? Because there's this like, supercharged milk available that can give your child like all of the proteins and nutrients that they need to become something or the other. I don't know. The other thing that I find interesting, I don't know if you've come across like any lab grown milk that is like positioned around like climate change.
Yeah.
So it's interesting they've chosen this market, but I think it is, I mean, it's a massive market, obviously.
Biomilk has actually situated themselves as like, we are trying to meet the challenges of how unsustainable it is to produce dairy products. I don't know if that's more of a marketing thing or what have you, but it has been mentioned that it is trying to meet those needs of being more climate efficient. Producing milk is actually very emission heavy.
Jumping back, I guess, to what Macy was saying, like it says here, we're fed up with feeling guilty about how we feed our babies, which is like the solution is a very particular attitude towards that problem, right? Like rather than sort of, whatever reasons, social reasons might be causing a feeling of guilt.
I think they also say that lactation isn't just for like cisgendered parents. So even though they have marketed themselves as like, mothers shouldn't feel the shame or guilt, they're also acknowledging like that there are needs wider than that.
And I guess this also comes like we have been going through a baby formula like shortage crisis too, right? So it's kind of like quite on top of minds of mothers needing to feed their babies. I am curious about this. It's like human milk banks and like this underground market and whether that could be leveraged a bit more. Sometimes there is just a surplus, like you're producing milk constantly and then your baby only needs so much. Like, can that be a natural resource that can be shared?
And then there's checking the quality of that. So ensuring, like, I guess in those moments where people are seeking out milk, they have to also check if it's quality, if it's good, if it can be trusted. And so it goes back to that trusting of what you can trust on the market. Like there are people in need, but they want to know that it's good, that the parent is treating their body good. And yeah, it's, I think, very complicated in terms of accessing.
I wonder if like it'll become an option or a preference.
Mm-hmm.
Like I guess the cost will determine it a lot of it, but yeah, like how will the CDC respond, right? Like what will be the guide? Like if we think about breastfeeding guidelines, or just like, you know, how will nurses respond? How will it look in recommendations?
I brought up that Helena company as well, because it is so hard to actually get it tested and on shelves. They've positioned themselves as a company that the milk could also be in bars and in cafes and stuff. So I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
Right. Which is probably a lower bar to getting on shelves than something that's for babies. Interesting. Okay. Signal or noise, Macy?
I think it's a signal. I mean, I'm trying to figure out where it's going. There's like so much to this. I think it touches on motherhood in general, like family structure in general, like, and then production shortages and how we're fulfilling those needs, as well as environmental and climate change concerns. I'm curious to see where it goes. I think it's definitely signaling like innovative means of trying to meet certain needs, and kind of humans wanting to like surpass different value that products bring. So even just like looking at how the different companies position themselves was interesting. Yeah, okay. I don't really have like one direction with this,
but it's a signal for you. Okay. Hima, what do you think? Signal or noise?
I'm definitely torn. I'm torn between signal and noise. The noise for me feels like just another elite capitalist like solution that will just create like another option for people that can afford it. But the signal that I find like is interesting is like the family structure piece, and thinking about shifting family structures and moving away from like the idea of a primary mother, right? And needing that primary mother. Like, does it open up opportunities for co-parenting, to have 4 parents, obviously like different gendered parents and different conceptions of parenting? So I think that is really interesting, because there's so much reliance on mothers who choose to breastfeed, even in a very, you know, heterodynamic. You know, you often hear women say like, my husband can't do much in the first year. Everything is on me, right? I have to breastfeed 5 to 6 times a day. Like, how much can he actually participate? And so, yeah, shifting some of those dynamics is really interesting to me.
In some way, I would lump this into like it's neither signal or noise, but it's sort of progress, and from a scientific perspective, like progress occurring, and then kind of what would be expected from the commercialization of that scientific progress, whatever. But I feel like there's something in the marketing, like that's where I'm interested in tracking. Like I feel similar to how Maisie did, or I'm not sure like exact. I don't know if I can call it a signal, because I don't know I'm not sure exactly what it's signaling, but it's like as a signal to follow and to continue watching. I'm pretty curious, because I think a lot can be revealed through watching how these types of products are marketed and what the appeal of the various benefits and features of them are. So I don't know where that leaves me, signal or noise.
I think it actually signals a possible further decline in dairy and in people trusting dairy.
Cow dairy.
Like big dairy. I just think it just signals perhaps more of this decline in our trust in maybe food systems, but then specifically the dairy. People just seem to have this thing with dairy right now, and not wanting or preferring alternatives outside of it.
It's true. Everybody wants dairy alternatives, and they want new ones all the time.
There are milk products that are like milk with a Y, and
oh yeah. Here's a prediction: soy's coming back. Soy is falling out of favor. I think soy milk's gonna have a comeback. They got a bad rep for a while, but I think that'll change. Okay. Hima, what's your weakest signal?
My weak signal is a conceptual idea by a Berlin-based food designer. Their name is Alexandra Genus, and they've done a few like food speculative projects. They've actually like moved on to become a therapist, so they don't actually do this work anymore. But But I came across this article in Mold, and the concept is a living suit or like a wearable that is called biogenes. And it's sort of based on like a post-agriculture food production system that's based on microbes. And so the suit is something that you would wear. And she kind of describes it as like a gut microbiome that's turned inside out. So like it thinks about like the epidural system and the suit just like naturally feeding through the skin, but also sort of like the idea of us being like more nomadic and the suit and the microbes on the suit pollinating, plants as we kind of move around. And so it's able to ferment lignans and other plants into edible substances. And it's like meant to be like a mutualistic food source that sustains the host, so sustains the person. And the name is a riff on a Greek philosopher whose name was Diogenes. I don't know, Diogenes. It's an homage to them who they were notorious for a nomadic lifestyle. So it kind of comes from that thinking. And then it also is very inspired by Yuval Harari's assertion in Sapiens. And I guess he has a very strong viewpoint of wheat, and that like the agriculture revolution was kind of a fraud, and that wheat exploited humans to propagate itself. Because currently, I didn't know this, but maybe
we were domesticated by wheat.
Yeah, we were domesticated.
We were farmed by wheat.
And but wheat covers 2.25 million square kilometers of the globe's surface,
right?
Which is 10 times the size of Britain. So it's like in response to, like a post-agriculture vision. She also calls it gastrointestinal science fiction, which I kind of liked and thought was like interesting. But some of the things that kind of stood out to me, obviously it has very Dune vibes, right? There was like, they were wearing these suits in Dune that like, I think kind of would collect water and was like your water source. But the three things that sort of stood out for me is like the rise in just like gluten-free diets and like becoming more sensitive to the processed nature of wheat. But just like, I just feel like people's diets are shifting so rapidly. Like I find like everybody around me is like constantly shifting our diets. And I just wonder what that looks like in 50 years and our reliance, or like just rethinking like how we eat and what we eat and the idea of cooking in the same way. And as we think about even just rewilding the land, so much of the land is not arable anymore, right? We're consistently losing arable land. I think we've lost like a third of arable land in the world, and that, the way that we're producing food just like might not be sustainable in the same way, which I think obviously is like something that we know. But I also like the idea of like fashion being more functional. It's like we wear clothes every day, and obviously we kind of chalk it up to like there's a functional aspect of it as it connects to weather, and like connecting our own bodies. But there isn't like necessarily a relational aspect to fashion. And I'm like, oh, this is like, there's something really interesting to me that we can like walk around and have an impact on the environment, or like be in relationship with like other species just by like movement and just by wearing something. And that kind of being like productive, like even just like ideas of being productive. Like, are we all of a sudden farming just by wearing this suit and like walking around? And so yeah, I'm like interested in sort of the clothing aspect of it, and just generally like how diets are changing. Yeah. And how we might be in relationship with different species in new ways.
I like it. I feel like this is Erica's wheelhouse too.
I've been trying to brand edible fermented clothes as membranes for too long. You're very tapped in, Hima. Everything you were saying, the amount of
same page.
The amount of times I've quoted the wheat domesticating us thing. I was like, God damn it, she's tapped in.
Are we resisting against this wheat that's like domesticated us? Like I just find, I'm like, why all of a sudden can so many people not eat wheat anymore? Like what? I mean, we could chalk it up to pesticides and like that kind of thing, but like it is a very bizarre thing to me. Like, especially if I think about it as like an ancestral food and like lineages of like my ancestors who survived on different forms of wheat.
Right.
And like all of a sudden it's like, I literally can't eat wheat anymore.
Yeah, it kind of, yeah, it makes sense that there's like a somehow natural counterbalance to wheat taking up as much of the land in the world as it is, and that not being sustainable with kind of swinging the pendulum the other way. But it's just, we're just kind of pawns in that motion that through our own like allergies.
Yeah, it's like our bodies are responding to it's like the fact that it conned us, it conned us
Right.
into the land.
Yeah, wheat as like invasive species.
I just think it's more difficult with the whole concept is you mentioned like someone would be wearing this thing and that they would be walking and actually there would be some reciprocal thing that happens with their environment. So pollinating plants or
like spreading spores.
That actually, I think, is probably something that we don't consider when we move around in the world, just how much we shed or the way our bodies actually leave a trail when it walks through the world.
I like the idea of it as a tool for us to get more aligned, to have a more mutualistic relationship with our environments. I think maybe we've been groomed out of that a little bit now. And like, yeah, like our skin is like the largest organ. It's like, it's a living thing, right? Like, so it's almost like, let's put on this suit and like learn about it a little bit more. And that kind of catalyzes like us to shift our mindset a bit more into like that embodiment that you were talking about, like at the beginning here. And then slowly, like, can we shed that and actually like be ourselves and have that mutualistic reciprocal relationship, like as us. So I kind of see it as a tool to like bridge that gap, take that step, and then like become it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting. I think the funny thing about it is that we take different states when we become infected, which is kind of what this is I think the funny thing, like if you do sense very differently when you're sick, we've been there and we usually, I tend to usually not lean into it. I tend to want to avoid it as much. It's like podcasts on, like I'm going there and medicine or whatever, right? I have at times like sort of leaned into just like feeling what it is to have COVID or whatever. And like, just like, let's be with the sickness and see what that feels like. And yeah, like fever dreams, you have all kinds of different ways of sensing that come with you when you are infected, but it doesn't tend to be very comfortable. I mean, on the other hand, I guess when you have like healthy gut bacteria, you might be more creative or like you might have different, other kinds of like enhanced sensing experiences that would come through these things. So I think that aspect of becoming like relational with nature is cool. But I've like often like joked around with people about this, like, yeah, if you want to become like closer to nature, like catch the virus or get a bacterial infection or whatever. It's just like, it's like a funny thing that like under the radar. Is this getting like a skin bacteria infection? Is that what this is? And that can actually enhance the way that you're sensing things in the world. Okay. I buy that. It might be really uncomfortable too, but
yeah, it's like uncomfortable until it's just not. It's like the new becomes the new normal, right?
Yeah.
But it is interesting to think about what training we actually do need.
Yeah.
Because it is like still like I think obviously we talk about things like growing your food and gardening, right? But like what are deeper levels of that relationship?
Having a sensitive stomach.
Yeah, like allowing yourselves to like infect each other, I guess.
Yeah.
In some ways.
I think this was in a workshop with culture too, actually. And I forget the name of the girl who actually said it. So I'm sorry about that. But it really changed my framing in terms of how we think of ourselves as consumers. And she said a lot of insects and bugs, like worms, think the way they exist in the world is as decomposers. So she asked, like, what would it be like for us to think of humans as decomposers rather than consumers? The materials and things that we use have to go through a certain life cycle, and then they're going to go back into the earth. And we process them in a certain way. And it just changes your relationship to the things that you either wear or that you're eating. We're not just taking in things and making them and they go nowhere. They do live on. And so as decomposers, what happens to those things afterwards? And just that idea of something that could be like a material that can decompose or a thing that actually lives on I think that it applies to that. It's that as we move through the world, we are leaving a trail of something, and we are using resources. So that model always really stuck with me because it really flips your brain in terms of thinking what our impact is when we are consuming and releasing.
It also made me think about how are we going to move around the world as the climate changes, and what is going to be our responsibility in moving around. How do we go to places and think about our footprint differently, but also what's the reciprocal relationship when we go to new places?
What are we contributing to those places as well as taking?
Yeah, because so much of how at least the Western world moves around is through a consumption frame. And it just feels like it's going to get to a place where that's just not sustainable anymore. Either travel will have to halt, which I think some people believe that might be necessary, but humans will always move around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we impose quite a bit of control just to try to stop the spread of certain fungal and bacterial species out in forest. I don't know if anyone's experienced anything like this. I was in New Zealand a few years ago, and we went hiking, and going into the park, there was a whole high-tech door, just a door, and you're just in a park in a dusty parking lot going into the park, but this door has sprays your shoes because they don't want people walking that have walked somewhere else where this fungus is spreading or whatever. And yeah, they were very concerned in general in New Zealand too, of just biosecurity from even at customs. They'd likely look for your hiking boots and stuff like that, and ensure that they're clean and that sort of thing.
No, I've never experienced that before.
Yeah, they're taking a lot of care for making sure that something like that happens. But yeah, I've never experienced it anywhere else. It's one place.
I guess it's just there's a fine balance within certain microbiome ecosystem environments that it's endangered now because we've exploited everything else around it, right?
Particularly probably on an island like that that's been isolated from certain things and then has tourists coming.
Taking those precautions of that, what you would wear, what would be on you in any given environment is also important, that you just can't trudge around and
sliding your feet into some local moccasin or whatever it might be, and walking that. It's kind of interesting. That's that maybe does something good for that space, for that ecosystem, and it relates to that ecosystem. I think that's cool.
We started wearing masks, obviously, more globally. That has been a practice that was meant to be good for the kind of broader ecosystem from a health perspective. But is that also the beginning of thinking about what we're wearing? Yeah. Beyond just the mouth, but other parts of our body and how it impacts the ecosystem.
There's that idea of blocking things that might be dangerous, but at the same time, I think with this idea of the suit is as this living, almost a living organism, can it be adaptive in a beneficial way to everywhere that we go, which is even more advanced and interesting.
That kind of reminds me of materials that are sensitive to, again, the environment and tell you something about it.
Respond to it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It reminded me a lot of this project from Mary Oxman in 2014. That was a spacesuit that was also fungal grown or bacterial growth around your body that would produce the air you need to breathe and kind of be your grown interface between yourself and this otherwise uninhabitable planet, but kind of growing. It's a good membrane actually, growing to borrow from America. It's a sort of a membrane between one individual and the whatever lunar, Martial, or other environment that they need to survive on. It kind of can produce food and air that you need to breathe.
Yeah, we're not building spaceships, we're building spacesuits.
Right.
Seems more practical.
Yeah, we need them spacesuits for living here.
And maybe at some point we'll just grow appendages and we'll grow things out of our own body instead of needing the suits.
Okay, Cronenberg.
That's it. Spacesuits for social survival.
Yeah.
Signal or noise. Macy?
Can this be a tool to train us to embody and actually maybe in actuality respond in a more mutualistic way to our environments? I'm hopeful that is a signal of that.
Erica?
I think it's a signal of, I really enjoyed the idea of regional sartorial care.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. I think I actually found it. I got a lot of inspiration from it. I think it's very much a signal in that it has inspired so many good ideas through the conversation.
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's just so many people kind of interested right now in materials that break down and have a different impact. I don't know. That also plays into it.
And then deadass, like I'm curious about what are our spacesuits for social survival? There's something in this like full circle characterization that we had. Like there was some very weird ways into the mundane, into everyday life. To the broadcast from later.